Welcome to Outbreak Brief, the podcast that takes you inside the world's most dangerous infections. Today, we're tracking a microscopic killer that reshaped human civilization, wiped out half of Europe, and is currently hiding out in the very squirrels and marmots you might see on a wilderness hike. We are hunting Yersinia pestis.
Yeah, it's a pathogen that really doesn't just belong to history books. I mean, it's an active, constantly evolving threat that just completely masters the biology of its hosts.
Right, so picture this. It's October 1347. You're standing on the docks in the bustling port of Messina, Sicily. A fleet of Genoese trading ships glides into the harbor, but, something is wrong. The docks are quiet.
It's quiet, yeah.
Exactly. And when the harbor master boards the lead ship, the scene is just absolute devastation. The sailors are either dead or dying. Their bodies are radiating fever. Their skin is covered in these agonizing, mysterious black sores. You are looking at the arrival of the Black Death.
It's a terrifying image. But before we let that ancient maritime scene settle in, we really need to violently shift the timeline forward. Let's jump to July 2020.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, a teenage boy in modern-day Mongolia hunts and eats a local marmot. And days later, he develops a sudden fever, chills, and just unimaginable pain in his lymph nodes. And despite all of our modern medical knowledge, all our technology, he dies.
Jeez.
The exact same ancient pathogen that floated into Sicily centuries ago is what killed him.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I've been digging through a massive stack of sources for this deep dive. We're talking CDC incident reports, historical epidemiological tracking from the World Health Organization, and some really incredible medical history papers on bacterial evolution.
There's a lot of material out there.
There is. And our mission today is to understand how the architect of the Black Death, a disease that literally altered the course of human history, is still thriving in the wild today, right under our noses. So what exactly are we dealing with here?
Well, we are dealing with Yersinia pestis. And first things first, it is not a virus.
Right.
It is a highly aggressive zoonotic bacterium. It's in the Enterobacterales order.
Now, I've heard that term before, Enterobacterales. Does that just mean it's related to, the kind of common bugs that cause food poisoning?
Yeah, exactly. It's a large family of bacteria that usually just hang out in the intestines. So you're looking at things like E. coli or Salmonella.
Oh, okay.
And what makes Yersinia pestis uniquely dangerous is its evolutionary history. Because between 1500 and 6400 years ago, it didn't even exist as the lethal threat we know today.
Wait, really? It's that young?
Yeah, evolutionarily speaking, it's practically a newborn. It was just a mild, environmentally resilient stomach bug called Yersinia pseudotuberculosis.
So instead of a street-level pickpocket, it's like a petty burglar who suddenly acquired the exact blueprints and master keys to bypass our body's entire security system.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. And what's fascinating here is how it got those blueprints. The bacterium acquired two specific plasmids.
And plasmids are, they're like little pieces of code, right?
Right, they're just circular rings of genetic material that bacteria can actually swap with each other. It's like downloading an app. So one is called PMT1 and the other is PPCP1.
And what do those blueprints actually tell the bacteria to do? What's the upgrade?
So the PMT1 plasmid, that one codes for a specific toxin that allows the bacteria to survive inside the incredibly harsh environment of a flea's midgut.
Wow, so it's armor.
Exactly. It essentially acts like a biological spacesuit. And then the other plasmid, PPCP1, that codes for an enzyme that rapidly breaks down blood clots.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, once it gets injected into a mammal, it uses that enzyme to dissolve the host's physical barriers and just spread rapidly through the tissue. So, along with a third plasmid it already had, these updates fundamentally shifted its life cycle. It went from a minor intestinal bug to a highly mobile blood-borne assassin.
A biological upgrade turned a minor stomachache into a civilization ender. And that upgrade leads us right into its historical rampage. Because when it hit humanity, it didn't just trickle in. It hit in three massive waves.
Right, we categorize these as the three great pandemics. The first was the Justinian plague starting around 541 AD. And that basically devastated the Byzantine Empire and spread all around the Mediterranean.
Right.
Then came the infamous second pandemic, which most people know as the Black Death of the 1340s.
Mm-hmm.
That wave killed roughly 50 million people in Europe alone. By some estimates, it wiped out a third to half of the entire population.
Which is just an unfathomable number of bodies.
It really is. And finally, the third pandemic began in China in the 1850s. And that one eventually spread globally via the modern trade routes.
And what blew my mind in the sources is that even between those massive global waves, the bacteria would just hang around and cause these highly localized, terrifying outbreaks. There's this eerie historical anecdote from 1820 in Majorca, Spain.
Oh, the shepherd story.
Yes, so an outbreak completely decimated the eastern part of the island, and the local legend traces it back to a mysterious, unnamed shepherd. Supposedly, he found an abandoned cape in a tomb where a previous plague victim had been buried years before. He touched it, contracted the disease, and that single outbreak wiped out 33% of the local population in towns like San Cervera from one piece of cloth.
And that perfectly illustrates the profound mystery that surrounded the disease for centuries. People had absolutely no idea what was killing them. They blamed bad air, curses, astrological alignments.
Because they couldn't see the real killer.
Exactly. It wasn't until that third pandemic, specifically during an 1894 outbreak in Hong Kong, that science finally caught up. There was this intense medical race between a French-Swiss bacteriologist named Alexandre Yersin and a really renowned Japanese scientist named Kitasato Shibasaburo.
And they were both trying to discover the bacteria at the same time in the same city.
Right. Both were racing to be the first.
Now, I know Yersin gets the credit, obviously, hence the name Yersinia, but the sources suggest it wasn't exactly a clean victory. Didn't Kitasato actually announce his discovery first?
He did, yeah, by a few days. But this is where the methodology becomes crucial. See, Kitasato's laboratory setup was highly advanced for the time, and he incubated his samples in standard, warm body temperature conditions, like you would for most human pathogens.
Makes sense.
But his samples were likely contaminated with the pneumococcus bacteria, which led to some very confusing reports. Yersin, on the other hand, was basically working in a makeshift straw hut.
Wow, quite the downgrade.
Yeah, but he noticed that the plague seemed to favor cooler environments. So he incubated his samples at a much lower temperature, closer to room temp.
And because of that temperature difference, only the true plague bacteria grew in Yersin's dishes.
Precisely. Yersin accurately identified the true gram-negative rod-shaped microbe.
Okay, let's pause on gram-negative for a second, because from my understanding, that basically means the bacteria wears a tough extra outer membrane, right? Like a layer of armor that makes it naturally resistant to certain attacks from our immune system and even certain antibiotics.
That's right. It has an outer lipid layer that acts as a shield. And a few years after Yersin identified this armored microbe, other scientists finally proved the link between rats, fleas, and the actual transmission of the disease.
Right, because identifying the bacteria was only half the battle. The real mechanism of how it was moving from the shadows of the rodent world into human homes is wildly mechanical.
It really is. The primary transmission route is vector-borne. Specifically, it's through flea bites. And the most notorious culprit here is the rat flea, Xenopsilla chiopus.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, the biology feels like a science fiction movie. The bacteria actually form a massive, sticky biofilm inside the flea's digestive tract, right?
They do. They create this physical plug in a part of the gut called the proventriculus. It completely blocks the plumbing.
Wait, so the bacteria essentially weaponizes the flea's biology, turning it into a starving, biting machine that regurgitates the bacteria into a human just to try and eat?
Yes, exactly. Because the flea's gut is blocked by this bacterial mass, no blood can reach its stomach. So the flea begins to literally starve to death.
That's horrifying.
It is. In a frenzy, it bites repeatedly, seeking blood from any warm body it can find, humans included. As it tries to swallow, the blood hits that bacterial blockage and washes back out, regurgitating the Yersinia pestis directly into the bite wound of the new host.
Wow, so the flea's own biological drive to feed is just fully hijacked to ensure the bacteria's survival.
Completely hijacked. And once that bite happens, the clock starts ticking. If you are bitten by an infected flu, the incubation period is generally 1 to 7 days before you start showing acute symptoms.
But the sources also mention airborne spread. Like, if we are talking about inhaling the bacteria from someone coughing, how fast does that move?
Oh, the airborne rate is far faster. The incubation period for that could be as short as 24 hours.
1 day.
Just 1 day. And the basic reproduction number, or R0, for the airborne form can be very high in crowded, close-quarter environments because every single cough is launching the pathogen into the air.
So since this whole cycle typically requires fleas and animal reservoirs, it forces us to ask, who is actually crossing paths with this pathogen today? Like, where is it hiding right now?
Globally, the risk is highly concentrated. The World Health Organization identifies the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Madagascar, and Peru as the 3 most endemic countries today.
Okay.
In Madagascar, for instance, there's a distinct epidemic season from September to April where cases return almost every single year. And that's largely due to rodent populations moving closer to human dwellings during that season.
But it's not just halfway across the world. There is a surprising risk right here in the United States, specifically for outdoorsmen. We mentioned that 2020 case in Mongolia, but in August 2015, two totally unrelated teenagers contracted the plague while visiting Yosemite National Park in California.
Yes, and they likely got it from infected squirrels.
Squirrels, I mean, people feed them out of their hands.
They do, which is incredibly dangerous, and it moves up the food chain, too. There's a staggering statistic from a study in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. They tested pumas, mountain lions, and found that 47% of them had antibodies for the plague.
I miss half.
Yeah, and 36% of the ones they tested post-mortem actively had the bacteria. Pumas eat the rodents that carry the fleas, so hunters, hikers, and trappers are at risk simply because they're interacting with this infected food chain.
Okay, so imagine you're out west on a camping trip. You brush past a dead squirrel or maybe a prairie dog, and one of these starving fleas jumps onto your ankle and bites you. Let's trace what actually happens inside your body step by step.
Well, after that 1 to 7 day incubation, it starts pretty generically. You feel a sudden onset of high fever, chills, severe weakness, body aches, and likely some nausea.
Which sounds like the flu.
Exactly, which is why it's tricky.
Yeah.
But this is the bacteria entering your system.
And the first stop on that journey is the lymph node, which causes the most famous form, bubonic plague.
Correct. The bacteria travel from the flea bite through your lymphatic system to the nearest lymph node, where they begin to aggressively replicate. Those lymph nodes become agonizingly painful, tense, and incredibly swollen. We call these swellings buboes.
And those are typically in the groin or armpit, right?
Usually the groin, armpit, or neck, depending on where you were bitten.
Yeah.
And at advanced stages, those inflamed nodes can actually turn into open pus-filled sores.
Just brutal. But if your immune system loses the battle at the lymph node, the bacteria break out into the highway of your body, your bloodstream. This is when the disease shifts into its second phase, septicemic plague. And this is where the mechanics get incredibly specific.
Yeah, in the bloodstream, Yersinia pestis uses something called a type 3 secretion system.
I read about this. So imagine the bacteria docking with our immune cells, specifically the macrophages that are supposed to eat them. The bacteria then deploys a microscopic syringe. It injects a poison that literally paralyzes the immune cell, turning our body's premier defenders into helpless bystanders, right?
That's a great visualization. It completely neutralizes the immune response. Free to multiply in the blood, the bacteria cause massive internal clotting, shock, and organ failure.
And the clotting is what causes the visible changes.
Yes. This widespread damage restricts blood flow to your extremities. This is where your skin, especially fingers, toes, and your nose, turns black and literally dies while you are still alive. It's tissue necrosis.
Hence, the Black Death.
Exactly. And if it doesn't stop in the blood, it reaches its final and most severe destination, the lungs. This triggers the third form, pneumonic plague.
Which is the one you can cough onto someone else.
Yes. Whether the bacteria reach your lungs from your own bloodstream or you inhale them directly from someone else's cough, the result is the same. You experience severe chest pain, shortness of breath, and rapid development of pneumonia. You begin coughing up bloody, watery sputum.
Oh, man.
And crucially, like you said, every time you cough, you are now the vector. You're launching the bacteria into the air, making you highly contagious.
So we've walked through this incredibly bleak physical progression. If this happens to you today, I mean, is it still a death sentence?
Fortunately, no. Because Yersinia pestis is a bacterium, we have highly effective treatments today. Yeah. Common antibiotics like streptomycin, gentamicin, and doxycycline work very well.
Okay, that's a relief.
It is. For bubonic plague, it responds quickly to these, dropping the mortality rate from around 60% historically down to about 5% today.
But the sources stress a massive, unforgiving catch for the other two forms.
They do. For pneumonic and septicemic plague, the timeline is brutal. Antibiotics must be administered within 24 hours of the onset of symptoms.
So wait, so you literally have one day. If you miss that 24-hour window, the mortality rate for pneumonic plague approaches 100%. You can literally go from a mild cough to beyond medical help in a single day.
Yes, which is why public health guidelines are extremely clear. If a doctor even suspects plague based on symptoms and exposure history, they must start antibiotic treatment immediately. They cannot wait for laboratory cultures to confirm the diagnosis. The risk of waiting is simply too high.
I'm looking at this 24-hour mortality window and thinking, why are we risking this? We have mass vaccines for far less lethal things.
Is this bacteria just mutating too fast for a vaccine to catch it?
Actually, no, it's not about rapid mutation. It's about risk, resources, and the nature of the disease itself. A vaccine does exist, but the World Health Organization explicitly does not recommend it for the general public.
Why hold it back?
Because the disease is so easily treated with common antibiotics if caught early. Second, the actual risk of exposure for the average person is incredibly low. The vaccine itself also has limitations in how long it provides immunity.
Ah, so it wears off.
Exactly. So it is reserved strictly for high-risk groups. We're talking about laboratory personnel who are directly handling Yersinia pestis cultures or specialized healthcare workers in active outbreak zones. For the rest of the world, the focus is purely on prevention and rapid treatment.
Well, if we aren't relying on vaccines, our only true shield is stopping the bacteria before it ever touches us. What does infection control actually look like on the ground? It requires extreme precision. At the public health level, any patient with pneumonic plague must be strictly isolated to prevent airborne spread. Healthcare workers wear full PPE and take prophylactic antibiotics.
Meaning they take the drugs in advance, just in case.
Right, to prevent the infection from ever taking root in their bodies. For environmental cleanup, they use a 10% diluted household bleach solution, made fresh daily.
And I noticed the burial practices in the guidelines are incredibly strict.
Yes, you can never spray the face or chest of a deceased pneumonic plague victim with disinfectants, because the pressure of the spray can actually aerosolize the bacteria remaining in their lungs, endangering the people handling the body.
Okay, here's a thought. If we know that wild rodents are the source of these infected fleas, why don't public health officials just carpet bomb an outbreak area with rat poison? Just eliminate the hosts and stop the spread.
That is actually the single worst thing you could do. It breaks a critical, counterintuitive rule of plague management. Never kill the rodents first.
Why? I mean, it seems like the most direct solution.
Think about the mechanics of the flea we discussed earlier. If you kill all the rats, the infected, starving fleas are perfectly fine. They suddenly realize their food source is dead, and they immediately abandon the rat carcasses in a massive swarm, desperately seeking the nearest warm-blooded alternative.
Which is us.
Which is us. If you poison the rats first, you will actively trigger a human epidemic. You must always use insecticides to kill the vector, the fleas, before you kill the host.
Oh, wow. It's a delicate chess game. One wrong move and the board explodes. Which brings us to the current state of that board.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the modern landscape of plague is defined by what we call sylvatic plague. That means the disease is heavily and permanently entrenched in natural wildlife reservoirs.
Right. And by the numbers, between 2010 and 2015, we saw 3,248 global cases with 584 deaths. In the United States, it averages about 7 cases a year, mostly in those rural western states we mentioned, like New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado. And in places like Madagascar, the bubonic form returns like clockwork. We know how to treat it, but we clearly haven't beaten it.
And we likely never will. Because Yersinia pestis lives inside hundreds of species of wild rodents across the globe, complete eradication from nature is biologically impossible. It is a permanent neighbor to humanity. Our focus for the future isn't eradication, it's management.
And what does that management look like moving forward?
The scientific pipeline is heavily focused on speed. Because of that critical 24-hour treatment window, researchers are prioritizing rapid, point-of-care dipstick testing.
Like a rapid COVID test.
Exactly. Imagine a test as simple as a rapid swab or a pregnancy test, but for plague antigens. If it can be used in remote villages in Madagascar or the Congo, identifying the bacteria instantly means doctors can deploy those life-saving antibiotics instantly.
It's a profound thought to end on. You know, we build these massive sprawling cities, we conquer space, we carry supercomputers in our pockets. We think we have completely dominated the natural world, yet a microscopic bacterium, a bug that picked up a few discarded biological weapons thousands of years ago, riding on the back of a starving flea, still quietly dictates the boundaries of human expansion. Whether it's an ancient Genoese trading ship sliding into Sicily or a hunter stepping off a trail in modern Wyoming, the architect of the Black Death is still out there in the wild, waiting. Stay informed, stay prepared. This has been Outbreak Brief.